one of the things that lights me up with working with highly sensitive people is that we generally everybody has their own gift, but when we're highly sensitive, I was like, this the universe, spirit did not make us highly sensitive to make our life miserable, which a lot of us think it, right? We have like a really special gift, right? Because we're highly sensitive, we can tune into things that other people can't.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. The guest on today's episode is a woman who has followed a very similar path as myself. During a time of not feeling well, she was directed through a friend to receive Reiki. And this experience brought her great relief and a sense of ease that spurred her on a journey of healing and spiritual awakening. Following spirit and her intuition, she continued down the path of healing and education, learning from many indigenous wisdom teachings from all over the world. Now the founder of Dreamtime Healings, she utilizes her knowledge and experience with Reiki and plant medicines to help highly sensitive individuals and empaths to navigate this world and become thriving sensitives. So it's with great excitement that I introduce you to Helen Knight. Helen, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Thank you, Adam, for inviting me to join your program. I'm excited to be here.
Very excited to have you here. And like we kind of chatted a little bit about before we hit the record button, I found you through your website and was immediately intrigued by just your story and especially how you directly work with highly sensitives and empaths, which I myself am a highly sensitive empath. I personally look at them as both being one and the same, but also slightly different. Of a highly sensitive person is naturally an empath, but empaths are not necessarily a highly sensitive person. So for those of the listeners that aren't familiar with your work, would you take a little moment to kind of discuss a little bit about what you do and really the path in which it brought you here?
Sure. So yes, you touched on a little bit. I was living in Chile in South America, and I got sick. None of the Western medicines could help me. It was actually my Chilean mama. I was an exchange student there, and she's like, "Get Reiki," and Reiki's really big in Chile. And I was like, I didn't know what it was, and I was like, I got it, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. I don't know what this lady's doing to me, but this is amazing. And I was just about to move over to Australia to do my master's in Sydney, and I said, "I don't know what you're doing." I had about 10 sessions. It was so impactful that I was like, "Can you please teach me a little bit of what you're doing?" And so she taught me a little bit, and I was like, "Okay." So I always say Reiki was like my saving grace while I was doing my master's because I was undiagnosed celiac at the time. It took 20 years for a doctor in Boulder, Colorado to finally figure that out about 4 years ago. But in the meantime, I was, like, on the floor. Like, I don't know. It was the Reiki, it was my saving grace to get me through that master's program because I was so malnourished and, yeah, not in a very good way. And then I moved out into the outback in the middle of Australia. Australia is just as big as the United States, but it's not very populated, especially in the middle. And that's where I ended up working at a Waldorf school, and Spirit knew what they were doing. Um, I was doing my master's in English as a second language, but ended up Waldorf, kindergarten Waldorf, which is very spiritual. I didn't know anything about Waldorf education, but it is. And my whole world just opened up. I started studying Reiki, and each level I did, there were 7 levels, which resonated for me because it was for each chakra. And every level I did, and the more practice I did, the more magical things started happening that I didn't understand. And then it just kept growing and growing. And I really actually wanted to go back to live in Chile. And because I wasn't well still, Spirit guided me to Boulder, Colorado. I had lived abroad for 17 years. I had no interest in living in the United States, but I listened. And I'm from the East Coast. I'm not from this area. And within a couple of years, had my Reiki practice going, and it just so slowly developed over the years, and more things started coming in. Then I started teaching Reiki and helping people. I always say, like, Reiki's a wonderful foundation. It just it opens up to so many other things, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, here you got your foundation, but be open to your clairvoyance opening up, your clairaudience, your clairsentience, other healing gifts that you have, ability to communicate with the animals, with the land spirits, like mediumship. So it was so fun. I loved it, and just really encouraging people. And then in 2016, Spirit guided me to Guatemala for a quote unquote meditation retreat, but I knew that wasn't why I was going there. And that's where I discovered I was called to come into. I heard about a cacao ceremony, and I love chocolate. And I was like, cacao ceremony? What is that? And I went, and delicious ceremonial cacao, drink it. And it was more like a mystery school. It wasn't so much a ceremony. But in my second experience with that, I got the guidance to take back 50 pounds of ceremonial cacao back to Boulder, Colorado, and start leading cacao ceremonies with Shamanic Journey, of which I had led one at that time. I had only had one experience of leading it, which was so it was pretty scary. It was very scary. I was like, "Oh my God, do you want me to do what, Spirit?" Because it was Spirit was my teacher, right? It's not my first lifetime doing this, but it wasn't like I had training, formal training in it, and they just guided me. And maybe by ceremony 3 or 4, they said, okay, now start singing ceremonial songs. And was in the process of doing my vision quest in Colombia, which people are often like, what's the vision quest? And it's where you go sit on a mountain, and you have no water, no food, no shelter. You are with the elements for a certain amount of time. There's lots of different altars. This altar was 4, 7, 9, and 13 nights on the mountain. That you didn't have to do it one a year, but I think I took like 6 years to do it. And so they sing amazing songs. I speak fluent Spanish, and they were like, Helen, when are you going to sing a song for your vision quest? And I thought, okay, I'm going to finally learn some songs. And so Spirit had me in training in the leading the ceremonial the cacao ceremonies, and I did that for 3 years. And that was how Spirit was showing me the power of ceremony. Like when you
Mm.
come together, I always use the metaphor of, if you've got a big picnic table that you have to move by yourself, it's really hard. But if you got 3 friends, it's really easy. Everyone's got a corner and you move it. Ceremony is the same way. When you come into ceremony, everybody brings their energy, everyone brings their spirit team, and it creates this amazing vortex. I'm getting goosebumps as I say that. And so in these ceremonies, we were doing it with shamanic journey, and then people would share what they got in their shamanic journey, and like, oh my God, wow. And how a certain power animal would come in, and 5 people saw bears, or a polar bear or something, and just we all got that beautiful medicine, and it was so impactful. And they had me. I've done lots of plant medicine ceremonies, and like in Colombia, it's yahe, which is a cousin to ayahuasca, and peyote, and San Pedro. And then but those are, as a highly sensitive person, they are powerful, very powerful medicines. And then the psilocybin called me, and I started working with the psilocybin, and it was so much more gentle. Like, you're not throwing up generally. You're not, diarrhea. It's just when you're highly sensitive, oh, it's just so much more gentle. So Spirit then asked me to start in 2020 to start leading psilocybin with cacao ceremonies, which same thing. I wouldn't have formal training. I just listened to Spirit, and they guided. I started small. And then as this just grown, and now I'm in my fourth season of leading them. And I would say half of the people, there are about 15 people that come to ceremony now in a group. And I would say generally half are highly sensitive people, empaths. And it is I don't know in your experience if you found it, but I find a lot when some people don't even know they're an empath.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
or they've struggled their whole life, but they thought. I had one woman who came early last year. She would get dizzy when her family would argue. She'd just, lose her balance and she wouldn't feel well. And she got CAT scans. She got all sorts of things. And they're like, nope, nothing wrong with you. You're perfect. It was her highly sensitive being that was taking on all this energy. And so when she came to ceremony, it really heightened and it was like light bulbs went on like, oh, I'm taking on other people's energy. Maybe I should stop. Right. So then it's working with people. So ceremony, and then I call them spirit Reiki healing sessions that I do where we learn, right? Some people know, obviously, there's lots of people that come in, but it's like learning how to manage your energy so that it's not a curse. It's an amazing gift. I
Yeah.
always say, we just have to learn to manage our energies well, right? If you need to take a break, you take a break. If you need to, especially in ceremony, if you need to get away from there's a lot of stuff that goes on in ceremony. If you need to step away and go, to the other side of the field or sit by the tree to be calm and, centered, then you do that. But a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to offend anybody, or I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or the people pleasing is a big one, or, fearful to speak your truth. It's like, no, full permission. You need to take care of yourself. And so it's intense when it happens. Like I just had lit ceremony this past weekend and there was a very empathic woman in there and it got really, really intense for her. But now she got the gift of it and she's like, okay, I am no longer going to look at this as a curse. I'm going to work with it. All right. How do we do this, Helen? And so then we bring in the same, it's the Reiki. I bring also channel the light language, which is like sound healing, um, and the shamanic drumming. So it's a combination. I think Reiki is always such a beautiful foundation because it said other things sprout from it, right? So yeah, that's sort of what I'm up to now.
Such a beautiful passage of initiation that you have gone throughout your life. And I couldn't agree more that Reiki is, it sounds like in both of our opinions, that fundamental foundation for in any healing practice. I mean, that's where
Yeah.
my journey into the healing arts started, was realizing that
Mm.
something in my life needs to change and I needed to find something. Yoga wasn't doing it, meditation wasn't doing it. And then I discovered Reiki locally to me when I was living back in Washington State. And I went and just participated in a Reiki share. Didn't know anything about it, but reached out to the owner of the facility and she's like, well, we actually have a Reiki share in a couple of days. If you would like to come, it's a suggested donation, but you don't necessarily have to pay if you don't receive anything from it. And so I went and participated in that Reiki share and had several people ask me, so how long have you been practicing Reiki? And I was like,
Wow.
this is my first time ever. And it really made me realize that like we all have the capabilities of using Reiki. It's a fundamental gift
Yeah.
that all of us have. But when you learn to actually
Yeah.
attune to that energy, it is like it opens up the floodgates. You start to receive all of these gifts that you naturally have. And for each of us, they're going to be a little bit different. For me, it's opened me up to the path of breath work and coaching and intuitive energy work, and has even now started to expand. I'm kind of working on my own Reiki protocols of working with the elements and dragons and those types of energies, because that's what resonates to me. But then discovering of being a highly sensitive person, it was like that was the one missing piece that seemed to bring all of those other pieces together. And once I had that
Yeah.
information, it was like, okay, now I understand why I had to go through all of these individual steps before I received that one tidbit of information. So would you agree that
Yeah.
that's kind of been true on your path as well?
Yes, it has. And I always say too that um, what one of the things that lights me up with working highly sensitive people is that we generally everybody has their own gift, but when we're highly sensitive, I was like, this the universe, spirit did not make us highly sensitive to make our life miserable, which a lot of us
Mm,
think it, right?
yeah.
We have like a really special gift, right? Because we're highly sensitive, we can tune into things that other people can't. I guess like 15-20% of the population is highly sensitive. And that's where the healers, that's where psychics, that's where the animal communicators come, the medicine people. Um, so it really, yeah, it brings out the special gifts that we have. Yeah. Reiki really brings that out. And that's what I always say. It's that foundation and then watch what emerges.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I really love that you brought up of giving people the freedom within ceremony to detach from the container. And I had the
Yes.
experience of going down to Peru and sitting through a couple of ayahuasca ceremonies. And during my very first one, I went outside to purge and looked up and immediately was captivated by just the beauty of the stars and intrinsically receiving that feeling of I am a part of all of this and all of this is a part of me, and getting just pulled into that very present moment. And one of the facilitators that was part of the group came out and said, hey, it's time to come back into the container. It's time to come back in, time to come back in. And I didn't want to, but I did because
Yeah.
that was that container. The belief was that you were in the safety of this womb. It was a circular building in which we were having the ceremony, and very, very beautiful space, very beautifully led ceremony. But I feel like if I had the option to have stayed outside and sat with myself and sat with nature for a period of time, my experience would have been drastically different than the one that it was.
Yeah. And I think that's also kind of I also feel like I don't know your experience, but all the plant medicine ceremonies that I've been have been led by shamans, men.
Mm,
And I feel like this is part of the new energy is the divine feminine rising and coming back into union with the masculine, right? We got some wounded feminine and wounded masculine to work on.
yeah.
But I feel like that's part of what I'm being guided in my ceremonies is we do it a little differently, right? I don't hold that container. Ayahuasca is a stronger medicine, so there's some elements I can understand. I mean, wandering around on ayahuasca in the dark could be a little hairy,
Yeah.
right? But mushrooms during the day, yeah, I do allow people to go out, and one of the big reasons is because I do work with a lot of highly sensitive people that do need to take that space
Mm,
to go further away. Like some like even I drum a lot and I sing a lot, and the light language is intense. It's not like, oh, that's lovely to sing to. And sometimes people need to move away from that, right? And be like, oh, yeah. So it's also that. I think it's that little bit doing things a little breaking like the protocol, the
mm,
traditional protocol, and let's do things differently, right? A little bit more the feminine way.
yeah.
Um, so that comes in the ceremony too. Yeah.
It's like being more
Yeah.
of in that flow state and allowing what wants to happen instead
Yes.
of being so rigid in structure that it has to be this way when we're all unique. We all have different paths. We all need different things on our healing journeys, and especially in ceremony, that it's beautiful that you give that option to allow people to receive what they need when they need it, but also to receive silence and stillness if that's what's needed during ceremony.
Yeah, and what you just said also, it helps people blow up that like, there was a woman, this is her 2nd ceremony, an older woman who thanked me at the end. She said, "For letting me go off on my own." And I asked her in integration because I do a month of integration post-ceremony because it's very important, right, to help with that process. I said to her, "Why did you thank me? Like, you see people wandering around, like, you didn't have to stay you don't have to stay in that area. And it was that concept of like, "Oh, I'm supposed to be with the group." Like, I have to be with like, that's what we're supposed to do. Even though there were plenty of people wandering around, but she had it in her mind that she couldn't do that, and so it was like, "No, full permission if you wanna." And it was like this relief of like, "Oh, I actually really like my being by myself, and go by yourself." So it was this not only in ceremony, but in her own life, like, you don't have to conform. It was like, fuck conformity. Fuck the shoulds. That was one of the topics from this ceremony, and there was a board of rules from the retreat center of what you can. And at one point, I got this message, and then my assistant had to turn it around, and that was like, forget it, like, break the rules, break the old, and the rules that we've put on ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think when we're highly sensitive, because even like society really doesn't support us in that being able to take space and you know feeling you're going to offend somebody if you need to have your own alone time or leave a situation because it's too overwhelming. um, that these situations pop up to say, yeah, you can do that, full permission. And I always say to people too, just educate people, just let them know um, that you're highly sensitive and that things can get a little overwhelming and that you need a little alone time or a little space or whatever. It's just you just educate, it's communication. And then people just understand it and then they're like, oh, okay, got it. And if they don't, then that's their problem.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that has been such a fundamental part of healing my own relationship was having that open communication with my wife that, hey, like, I'm feeling super overwhelmed right now. I need some alone time so that I can gather myself back together. And then let's sit down and figure out, like, what can you help me with, or what can we start removing from our plate to allow for a little bit more capacity to be able to be held? Because as a highly sensitive person, if your cup is totally full and you add that much more, all of a sudden the contents of that cup are going to start overflowing. And that's when things start to get difficult and
Yes.
challenging in life. So I have learned that one, I need a lot of me time. I need a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
So I have structured my work
Yeah.
day to where I have gaps in between everything that I do. So I can just go take a walk out in nature by myself and reground myself, bring a little bit more capacity into my cup, and then I can come back refreshed to the next call or podcast or whatever it is that I'm working on throughout the day. But when I'm constantly at
Yeah.
that full capacity, it really limits my overall experience and makes it that much more difficult to stay present.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how are you? Have you had to work? People pleasing seems to be a big one too that I found
Absolutely.
with my clients.
I always say I'm a recovering people pleaser.
There you go. Right. So when we work in the Reiki sessions, it's like one of the intentions. We set intentions. It's like full permission to please yourself, right? And not see it like so many of us are programmed to think that if we're taking care of ourselves, then we're selfish and we're egotistical.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. It's just as you said, if your cup is overflowing in it, not a good way, then you don't have much to give to other people. So make sure
Yeah.
you're well sourced, and then you have much more to give. Yeah.
And what practices have you found to be very helpful in creating that space within your own life?
Nature.
Mm,
Nature, nature, nature. It's like sometimes people are surprised when they're like, someone, actually, a client last night said to me, "You don't meditate?" I said, "No, I go out into nature. That's my meditation. It's a walking meditation. I live in Taos, New Mexico. and I just go out into the forest. There's just no, I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, and now I live in Taos, and I just go out into this, it's like a forest, but for myself, and maybe once a week I'll see somebody, and that is where I get sourced. I hear messages from spirit. Um, Magical things happen with the animals and the birds and the insects. Um, and that is one of my biggest ones. And also, um, literally taking, depending on my day, like today's got a very busy day, I'm going to make sure that I get a chance to lie on my bed and do Reiki on myself
Mm.
for half an hour, 45 minutes. So just literally quiet, do some Reiki, recharge, and then those are the big ones for me. What about you?
Very similar. Yeah, nature is one of my. I do have a morning meditation practice that I do that's roughly about 20 minutes, and it used to be that I would
Okay.
just sit in mindful meditation and just try and be silent and be still. Over the last couple of months, though, I've
Yeah.
started integrating Cephalgeo frequencies, where I'll sit and listen to very specific sound frequencies for each of the individual chakras. And so I can start my day off
Oh,
from a
nice.
very balanced and present place. And like this morning, I, without any intention, received a lot of information on just a couple of the next steps that I need to take in some of the projects that I've been working on that will really help me to give more tools and skills to my clients and to some of the programs that I'm wanting to begin, or that I've been working on for a very long time, but have not really felt ready to put out
Yeah.
there. But it's interesting at how sound has such a unique way of opening us up, creating space,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
allowing that information to
Mhm.
start to trickle through. So, being that you are fluent in light language, do you want to dive into a little bit about? I personally view light language as it is like genetic coding from the universe, and it sounds different to every single person that hears it.
Yeah. Yeah, genetic coding from the universe. I like that because I've never it because light language comes in all different ways. Some people speak a different language. Sometimes they move their hands at will. Mine sounds like I would say kind of like I'm singing, but there's no words. And when I work with people, it will come in the spirit Reiki sessions, and it'll come in ceremony. I always say it's a soul activation, but I like what you're
Mm.
saying too. Yeah, I didn't understand it. I was a little embarrassed of it in the beginning. It opened up in my second mushroom ceremony. All of a sudden, I still can see it right now. I saw a huge cobra mouth vision, and I walked into it, and then all of a sudden, this weird sound started coming out of my mouth. And initially, this has now been like, I think 5 years or so that I've been doing this at least. I sounded like a man. So I was very kind of like, it was very low. And then over the years, it's developed. And now I can, there's lots of differentiations of the way it comes in. But and when the lower ones, it's often a very clear, it's a big clearing energy. They'll often bring that in ceremony, sometimes into sessions, but and it's like fierce, like
Mm.
clearing out, right? And then I call it my opera voice, where I'm not some amazing singer. I don't hurt people's ears when I sing, but not some, but they will go. It's because it's not me; they're singing through me. I'll go really, really high, and it sounds like an opera voice, but it's extremely high vibration. And I didn't understand it initially, and then people would give me feedback of like, "Oh my god, when you did that, this is what I felt, or this is what I received, or this is what happened in my body." And then so eventually I got to a place I'm like, oh, there's something, because I didn't understand it. There's something to this, and now it's fascinating, and often in ceremony it's eye gazing, so it's that soul activation um, that then comes through. Sometimes they'll tell me what it's about, and sometimes not. Like for example, I do bring Reiki in the actual ceremonies. I will do hands-on healing if needed, and that's been reflected back to me too, is that because ceremony can be really intense, just having that human touch is so nourishing. But there was this gentleman who had these amazing blue eyes this weekend, and he, I went, they guided me a light language, eye gazing, and then they had me put my hands on his heart chakra, do some Reiki, and then they were like, he had to lean into my hands, and I didn't really know, but someone observed it and said he was like 45 degrees leaning, and it was a tall man, like 6'2" or 3. And I asked him later because I didn't know what it was about. I said, "What did you get?" And he said, "It was being learning to trust that I'm being fully held by spirit." Because he had to literally lean into my hands, right? And I was a little bit below him. But it was the eye gazing and the light language that helped bring that in as well. So it's weird sounding. Sometimes it's beautiful, but yeah, it's I mean, I they actually I could because I can feel them when they want to come through.
Mm.
And I can turn it like I can imitate it, but they actually want to come through a little bit if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. This is a little this is yeah. So the spirit tears, oh, I call them spirit tears, come through. It's the love coming through. So let me just see. Um Okay. Don't normally
Mm.
come through, but that was a drop of love is the
Mm.
message for us. So
Beautiful.
yeah, that's the opera voice. It's one of the higher vibrations that they bring through. But yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So
Well, and makes sense that that would be combined with love, being that
yeah,
love is one of the
yeah,
highest vibrations.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, that's what comes through in sessions and in ceremony, and sometimes just when I'm by myself, but generally with other people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It's so interesting at how spirit can begin to almost use us as
yeah.
an instrument of its own accord, of knowing what every person needs to help them continue down the path that they are meant to be on. And I always find sometimes, and it's interesting that you mentioned the hand gestures, because I remember back to a session that I did with a woman several months ago where I was called, and I don't typically, I use Reiki much more so for my own self, and I do most of my sessions online. So I will call Reiki into the space and just have that open communication with that person's higher self, that this energy is present. If you want to use it, you are welcome to use it, but it's at least just there and open. But in this one particular
Mhm.
session, I was very, very called to channel to that person. And all of a sudden, my hands started moving and doing strange things that I've never done before, but I just allowed my body to do what felt right in that moment. And the feedback that I received from her at the end of it was just like, I don't know what you did, but it felt like you were here. But it felt like you were here with like 12 other people.
Because you were all those helpers.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just is, it
Yeah.
really goes to show that like when we can surrender to that process and trust the process and trust the divine guidance of the universe, that we are just an instrument within this divinely orchestrated game, that we can really make incredible changes, not only within ourselves, but within other people's lives, even though it's not actually us that's making the change.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I often like, especially when I was teaching Reiki, am I doing it right? Right? Am I doing it right? And I remind them, I'm like, it's not you. You're not doing it. It's coming through you. Like a lot of the shamanesses, it's like they refer to as the empty hollow bone,
Yeah.
right? But I think that can apply to anybody. They often bring that with the medicine people, but yeah, it's you are the channel. That wasn't me singing. Those were the spirits that were singing. I was just the vessel,
Yeah.
right? And so that was something that when people would learn Reiki, I was just like, don't get caught up. You're not, you're the channel, right? Just be that hollow bone. Let it flow through you. You don't have to be perfect. It's perfect. The way you're doing it, you've got the symbols, you're doing it. It's great. Keep doing it. And then that would
Yeah.
just build people's confidence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like the same thing with in ceremony. It's like it's the land spirits, the medicine, it's our ancestors, it's the elements, all of them coming in to work with us to make the shifts. And I like what you said about the Reiki. Do you get this that people think that you can't do Reiki remotely?
Yeah.
Like people are like cannot get their head around it. Like, how does that work? Because I was in Boulder, Colorado for 12 years, and so people would come and see me. And so when Spirit guided me to leave, it was during COVID. COVID for me was a blessing because it forced everybody online because they were like,
Right.
"Oh, Helen, it's not going to be the same." And I've said only difference is you're not going to have my physical warm hands on you. The rest is going to be, I think, it's even more powerful um, now. And so I've had to do a little convincing. Um, but people like I have a gentleman who worked with me in Boulder. He's in Ireland, and he was pretty anti remote. And then I said, give it a go. Just give it a go. And he's like, okay. And then they do it, and they're like, this. I said, energy is not limited to time or space, right? It
Right.
can be wherever you are. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I really, I'm a huge fan of quantum physics. And so I like to explain to people in scientific terms a lot of times because, many people that are just beginning their spiritual or healing path are still very analytical and still very linear in how they are thinking. And so being able to use those terms like quantum entanglement, where, one particle can start moving and the other particle that is in relation to that is going to start moving at exactly the same time, regardless of the amount of distance that's separating those particles. And that is how Reiki works. As soon as it's called in and that intention is there, it doesn't matter if a person is 5 miles away from you, 1 mile away from you, or 5,000 miles away from you. It's instantly going to be there when it is needed and necessary because, again, we are not the ones physically doing it. We are just that channel and conduit.
Yeah. And does that help people? They're like, oh,
It does.
they get it.
It
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
It especially when explaining to them, and when I received my Reiki training, it was told that it's only to be done in person. It was told it wasn't to be done
Oh,
online. And so I held that belief for a very long time. And then upon learning how to do breath work online shortly after, we're still, this was in 2022. And so still kind of dealing with some of the COVID stuff, but for the most part, it was starting to be
Right.
over. And being that my wife and I, we aren't currently living in it, but we have a self-converted school bus that we turned into a tiny house, and we've lived in it for the last 4.5 years, traveling all over the country. And so for me, being able to do things in a digital space is much easier than trying to find a facility to be able to rent or some space. And so as I continued my breathwork practice, I started doing more and more stuff online, and people were always amazed, especially people who had experienced my in-person sessions, at how powerful the online sessions were in comparison. And for some people, it actually was more powerful online because
Yes.
you're in the comfort of your own home. You're in a space where you feel safe, where you feel like you can be everything that you need to be. You can go as deep as you need to go. And I'm still there to guide you. I'm still there to hold space for you. Even though I'm not physically there, my spirit is still
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. 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 I love that. That's what I see. And you hear the light language. I mean, it's loud, and I often will drum as well. And I say to
Mm,
people, I can't do that in a wellness center. I don't want to do that in a wellness center, but I don't,
yeah.
it's not possible. I can't bring in all my gifts if I'm in person. And yeah, I've and then you wrap up and they can lie there. They can lie there. They can stay on their bed or sofa for as long as they want. Get up when they're ready. Go for a walk in nature. Yeah, I think it's. I do. I would. I do most of when I receive healings. I love it. I'm like, yeah, I don't have to drive anywhere. Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
And it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so
Well,
good.
and there's something to be said for you bringing up driving. Of the worst thing is going and having an absolutely amazing, say a Reiki session, and you come out of that and feel totally blissful
Yeah,
only to have to go and sit in traffic.
yeah,
What more
yeah.
is going to pull you out of that state of being than being
Mhm.
surrounded by a bunch of people who are stressed out because they're also stuck in traffic and they just want to get home and don't want to have to deal with all of the red lights or all of the cars or people cutting them off and honking, and versus when you
Yeah,
do it from the online container, you don't have to leave. You get to just stay in that
yeah.
space for as long as you need to.
Too. Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, in Boulder, and here too, there's lots of snow. So that was
Mm.
another thing. Wintertime, you come out from an amazing session. You might have some snow on the ground that you gotta, you know, drive in it, and it's a little hairy. And so, yeah. No, online, I still get requests. Are you ever going to do in person? I'm like, no, no,
Yeah.
no. Remote works perfectly. Yeah.
Now, would you say that the only difference to that is obviously like ceremony? Because within a ceremony, it's
Yes.
you definitely need to be in the container. And I love at how you broke it down is when you gather people together, it creates a vortex. I've never heard somebody use that terminology, but that's exactly what it is. It's this unified
Yeah.
consciousness where everybody is spinning their energies together with the same intention, but also within individual unique intentions. So like how have you noticed that ceremony has progressed over the years as kind of the collective consciousness within the world is continuing to expand and continuing to become more open to these ways of thinking again?
As well, it's just exploding. I mean, I live in New Mexico, but Colorado is now decriminalized psilocybin. Like, I mean, is it Washington or Oregon? I always forget those two
Or it's
mixed up.
Oregon, yeah.
But it's just Oregon, Oregon. Yeah, I mean, it's just exploding. The interest. I mean, I always say thank you, Michael Pollan, for your fabulous book and the Netflix video. I haven't watched it. Um, But I get a lot of people who are hearing that, and are like, it's just the medicines are calling, right? This is the part of the prophecy that this time would come, and these are the gifts from Mother Earth. This is the wisdom from Mother Earth, and so people are just they're interested where maybe they weren't before, and they're just like, I don't know why. Like I had somebody come to ceremony whose family has come, and her sister and her dad and her mom, and she was kind of like, "Meh." And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she's like, "Actually, I think I want to do that." And I always say this: the medicine will call you.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just so many people that the word is spreading, and then it's like, oh my God, like look at you! I want what you've got, right? Because the medicines are really helping. And I just started a microdosing program to help with the integration process as well. And that's another one. Like I was listening to Paul Stamets say, microdosing just makes happier people,
Yeah.
right? And I just like, yeah, the microdosing. So even if you didn't want to do a ceremony, you can microdose. You can microdose, you can do mushrooms, you can do cannabis. I mean, there's all sorts. You can just do little amounts. There's a woman in Colorado who's mom's on mushrooms, right? She's teaching about microdosing for mothers who are so often really stressed out. So I think it's. I mean, it was the ayahuasca. I mean, I don't know where you live, but Boulder is like. I mean, ayahuasca ceremonies, yahe ceremonies have been going on for a long time there. And but it was, the natives in South America were told you have to bring this medicine out of the jungle. Like you have to bring and share this because this is where the wisdom is. And so I think they're just such amazing. I call them divine teachers.
Mm.
Like what I just love integration time because I don't get into people's journey. People journey and I don't encourage and I don't discourage people's interactions in ceremony. It can be very profound. Like people can, um, have a 5-minute conversation, and it can really help both of them in their journey. But I'm not conversing. I'm holding the container for the vortex of us. But in the next day, or if it's a day one, a couple days later, I hear about the integration, and it's just I'm never it never ceases to amaze me the amazing healing and magic that comes in of, oh, well, that I really thought I had to forgive my ex for his horrible behavior. It's actually I had to forgive myself for being complicit in that and what happened, And and then I mean, there was a woman 2 ceremonies ago who got that and actually called up her ex and apologized, and she had 2 exes, called up the first one and apologized. And then a couple weeks later, he came back to her and said, "Well, actually, I gotta apologize to you."
Mm.
Right? And it was just like, this is the beautiful things that can happen. So I also talk how our conscious mind is 5%. 95% is the subconscious. That like blows me away when I hear that still.
Yeah.
And that's where the plant medicines get in there. They get in there and they'll, this stuff you're like, "Oh, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm totally fine with my mom passed when I was 3. Yeah, I'm fine with it." And then you get in there and then you see the little 3-year-old who lost her mom, grieving and had never been able to grieve. And then that grieving happens and then there's more peace, right? Or, whatever it is. But it
Yeah.
just gets into that subconscious. Yeah. So good.
Yeah. Really brings the light into the darkness in a way and gets to
Yep.
show us.
Yeah.
And that's a point that I always try to make with people who ask me about that they start to hear the call from spirit to try certain plant
Mm,
medicines. And
yeah.
I've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but I had a 16-year dieta with cannabis. And it was
Oh,
not healthy for much of those 16 years. But
okay.
when I finally experienced psilocybin and ayahuasca and San Pedro, they showed me where it was that I was not being of integrity. They showed me where it
Mm,
was that the work still lied. But none of them gave me the answers or the direction or
mm,
told me you need to do this in order to heal yourself. They just were the light in the darkness.
mhm,
They just showed me
mhm,
where it was that I actually had to do the work. But it was up to me. And I love how you bring up that you do a month-long integration process, because I don't feel that a lot of places offer enough integration
mhm.
after ceremony. And it's through that integration process where you have the opportunity to actually apply the wisdom that you were given
Yes.
and then actually
Bingo,
make the
bingo.
changes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I put people in accountability groups, little accountability groups, yeah, because 'cause we're human, right? And life takes over, you've had this really potent experience, and it can either come sometimes turn your world upside down of like, "Oh my god, all this new wisdom, like, what do I do with this?" So that's part of the integration container to support that process, and I'll work one-on-one with people if they need it. Um but also just like, "Hey, I remember what you got. Are you doing that?" You know, whatever it
Mm,
is, you know, holding each other accountable because we were all there and we all shared. When I do the overnights here in Taos, the next morning, everybody shares. It takes, 3, 4 hours, but I really give everybody a voice and people reflect on, when you share, someone might reflect and as we all know what we went through and it's just that it's the care, it's the support, it's the love, it's the witnessing that can go on and just knowing that you're not doing it alone. That's a big one because a
mm,
lot of people too that depending where they're coming from, they can be surrounded by people who think they'd be cuckoo to do this,
yeah.
right? Like, and they do not understand, or they're not judging it, but they don't understand it. And so, just being in your container with the people who you run ceremony with is just so supportive. And then I've just added this microdosing, just started it, and we're using the same medicine that we used in ceremony because it can be so beneficial with that process of for like this past one, it was very, very, very potent. And there was actually usually you'll get ego death in a heroic dose. No one did heroic doses yet. There were like 5 people that had ego deaths and rebirths. So
Mm,
they're rebirthing themselves, like having that medicine to support them and the group as they emerge into something that probably don't even know what that is yet um, is really supportive. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Yeah, and
it's good.
I think that's
Mhm.
that's a good case in point that you don't have to dive all the way into the deep end with these plant medicines to receive what you need to receive. You can go
Yeah,
through
yeah,
just a very small dosage and I still will occasionally use cannabis, but now in a ceremonial fashion. But in comparison to my previous usage, it's micro dosing compared to very much macro dosing that I used to do. And I
yeah,
actually receive so much more benefit out of it now than I did then because it's taken with intention. It's taken with the purpose
yes.
of
Oh,
receiving
bingo.
information, connecting to my divine self, connecting to the spirit in which I have had much communion with for many, many years. I feel very comfortable being held by Mama Ganja. I feel very comfortable in that space to go deep within my own internal darkness and face that which I haven't been wanting to truly face. Ayahuasca, I
Yeah,
didn't feel quite as safe taking that venture because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I didn't know what to
yeah,
expect. I'd read a lot, I'd listened to a lot of podcasts or watched a lot of YouTube videos of people talking about their experiences, and it's like people seeing rainbow serpents and like being eaten by the snake and having to go through dark tunnels of thorns. And I'm like, I don't really want to experience that, but I guess if that's what I need to go through, then that's what I need to go through. And for Fortunately, none of my experiences were like that. They were very gentle. They were exactly what I needed to go through. And the fact that you brought up that forgiveness piece, that was a huge piece that I received. Was I had to go through this long list of people that I had to forgive. And at the very end of that list was
Yeah.
myself. And that was the
Right.
hardest
Yeah.
one to
Yeah.
forgive.
Yeah. 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 And I think also a lot of people, your bit about intention is it's huge because when people, because especially mushrooms, people are like, oh, I did it in college or whatever. I think
Yeah.
it's very different when you're doing it in sacred ceremony, right? And then the other piece is when we are highly sensitive, we often don't need the big, huge amounts of medicine to get what we need. And there's some people that, like, I remember, especially newbies coming in, they're like, life's good. I don't feel like I'm struggling or I've got like major trauma. And I said, this medicine can also be lots, like, it doesn't have to be just going into the dark. It can be giving you guidance to your next step. There was one gentleman this weekend, I mean, he laughed, I would say 3/4 of the ceremony, and his laughter brought so much joy to the other people, right? I said, "They can
Mhm.
make you laugh a lot." Ayahuasca,
Yeah.
I've only been in, like, once maybe where there was a lot of laughter. Well, not as much, but there can be lots of joy, lots of love, lots of uh, amazingness. It's just not all like, oh, we're swimming through the dark and that's what it's about. And like it can really give that beautiful guidance on the next step or create. There was a woman this ceremony, super creative. She's like, Helen, can I go get my paints? I'm like, yes. Oh my God, her creativity was on fire. She had her canvas and she painted some sticks and some trees, and it was a whole ancestral healing that she got on her mother's
Mm.
lineage through her painting. And it's like, yeah, creativity. Because cacao also is a big element for the creativity. It
Absolutely.
They're very clear that I had to serve the cacao with a psilocybin, and it enhances. They're both heart medicines, but it enhances, and creativity is a big one. Yeah.
Mm. I think that's such a beautiful combination. The very first time I ever experienced breath work was coupled with cacao. And I truly believe
Nice.
that that combination was why I had such profound experiences, because the cacao really cracked my heart wide open. And then the breath work allowed me to dive into my heart and really see what was keeping
Yeah.
me from truly feeling my heart the way that I needed to.
Yeah. Yeah. Cacao is just, some people are like, it's just chocolate. I'm like,
Mhm.
ceremonial cacao is not Hershey's chocolate. It's the heirloom, it's the good stuff, and it's medicine. It's beautiful medicine. And spirit was very clear with me. So ceremonial cacao generally makes me, and I think other participants, it's a diuretic, so it makes you thirsty.
Mhm.
And so I was gonna go out and I was still in Boulder at the time, and I was gonna go just do my own ceremony, and I was just being lazy. I didn't wanna take a bunch of water with me where I was going. It was April, so it was spring, it was getting warm, and I just took the psilocybin with me and, got set up about an hour, and all of a sudden the clouds came over and it was freezing cold. I was so cold I had to go home. And once I got home, spirit, it was like reprimand me, like, you do not do the psilocybin without the cacao. Like that's your medicine. That's what you serve. And like, don't forget it. Oh, okay. Understood. It was actually later that I learned that in Mexico, that's the traditional way that they
Mm.
serve it, cacao with mushrooms. Yeah. So, and I have this
Fantastic.
very strong link with Central and South America. So it kind of like, oh, okay, makes sense. And the cacao I serve is from Mexico. Yeah.
I, I I really enjoy at how much, even though you haven't received necessarily training, if you will, through any particular way of utilizing these medicines, and yet through Spirit's guidance, you are following the exact ways that so many indigenous cultures have utilized these medicines for thousands of years. And I think that is a case in point where people feel a lot of times like, oh, well, I'm not going to go with this coach or this healer or plant medicine ceremony because they don't have a certificate. They don't have a piece of paper that says that they are qualified to do that. But personally, I didn't go to college, and yet many people that find that out are blown away by that just purely from a lot of the information that I bring to the table. But that's because I went to the school of life, and I am still in the school of life. And I have learned through my life the information that resonates with me, and the information that doesn't resonate with me, I let float down the river and continue to go because it wasn't meant for me.
Yeah.
And so would you say that is also maybe an invitation you would give to people as well, of don't be so rigid in needing some sort of a validation that somebody knows what they're talking about, but really allow their energy and their spirit to speak for themselves?
Yes, absolutely. And I also see like the other side is like, especially when we're highly sensitive, you've got these amazing gifts. Oh, but I have to do that one more course, or I have to go
Mm.
do that one more thing to get the piece of paper that says, I'm a Reiki master. I'm a blah, 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 right? Then I can bring my gifts. I'm just like, just start doing it. Just start. You got your Reiki 1 level attunement training, start giving it and see what happens. Practice, put it into practice, because some people also will, like, I had people come to my Reiki trainings that, I don't know, so they were, like, repeating, and I'm like, "Did you actually learn how to give Reiki?" "No, I just got the attunement." I'm like, "Well, that's wonderful, but Reiki is here to share, so share it." Right? And I am very in tune with my intuition, which a lot of highly sensitive ones are, or know that their intuition is there, but they choose not to listen. But spirit guides us. Spirit guides us, right? So leaning in, and I always say, like, start with baby steps, right? Because it builds confidence. Start with baby steps of, you know, uh, you know, uh, whatever it is. You're going to the grocery store, and you get a little message saying, pick up some extra tomatoes, and then when you get home, you're being invited somewhere, and you're like, oh, I'm going to make a tomato basil salad, and I've got it all with me. It's a simple example, but just listening to your intuition for the little things, and then it's like, "Oh, that played out, that worked. All right, let me." And it's easier to trust when the bigger messages come in.
Yeah.
It builds our confidence. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think I do want to clarify as well, though, of like what I was saying of not to be so fixated on somebody having a piece of paper, but also use your intuition and your discernment, because there
Mhm.
is the dark side of that aspect where people have gone through a ceremony and then are just like, oh, I'm a shaman now and I can just hold space for other people. And
Bingo.
that is kind of
Yes.
a shadow
Bingo.
aspect of the wounded masculine and
Yes.
feminine, feeling that
Yes.
they are ready before they're actually ready. And I received my Reiki master training in 2016 and still haven't taught any Reiki classes because I didn't feel at the time that I had done enough practice to be at the point
Mhm.
of being able to teach other people from my perspective on how Reiki has worked for me. Now I'm in the process where I feel like, okay, I've got enough practice under my belt now that I feel confident in being able to give others these tools and skills based upon my experience from actually using it, not just going directly from that class and being like, okay, I've got my certificate. Now I can start teaching classes. And so there is that needed level of discernment.
Yes. Yeah, you said it. You took the words out of my mouth because yeah, especially in the medicine world, you do
Yeah.
get that is the, "Oh, I've been to 2 ceremonies and now I can hold space and, I can be a sitter or I can lead," and it's just like, "Oh my god, no." There's so much more to it, and yeah,
Hmm.
discernment, and I get people who will ask me about other medicines and if do I know anybody, and I'm like, there's a couple people that I would recommend, and I said, but if it's in a different, I said, just use you talk to them. I always do a pre-ceremony, like it's like an intake call, just to make sure that we're in alignment.
Yeah.
Does this person resonate, and vice versa, right? It's important. Yeah.
Yeah, because you
So
definitely don't want to invite just anybody into your circle, especially if they're going to potentially
mm-mm.
cause any sort of ripples within the fabric of that vortex.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had my lessons because it's happened, right? It's happened, and that's where you again always growing and learning, and then you get better at discerning. You get learn how to better questions, able to hold space in a more potent way. Yeah, always
Yeah.
growing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Helen, this has been an absolutely very fulfilling and wonderful conversation. And so before we
Mhm.
part ways, I would just love to ask you the embrace and expand signature question of, Helen, what did you have to embrace in your life in order to expand into the person you are today?
I think the core one was I think I was bulimic for 10 years, did a lot of damage to my body, and then at age 34 was really, really sick and learned that if you do not have your health, you have nothing. Nothing.
Mm,
And so for me, it was taking care of my body, listening to my body, treating my body like the temple that it is. And I've had this very, very long journey um, along the way of yeah, when you learning that your health is number one, you treating your body and your spirit in a loving, caring way. Otherwise, you don't feel so good, and life is not fun. So that was the catalyst for me, and so yeah, it's brought me to where I am today.
wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it is true. If you don't have your health, what do you have?
Yeah, nothing. Yeah. I was 34, felt like I was like 94.
Mm, yeah. Well, so if the listeners are interested in getting in touch with you or maybe experiencing one of your ceremonies, what would be the best places to get into contact with you?
By my website, which is Dreamtime Healings with an S.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well, just those two social medias. But yeah, you can check me out there and send an email. I'd love to connect.
Beautiful. Well, Helen, thank you so much for your time and bringing your wisdom to the Embrace and Expand podcast. I'm sure all of the people that are going to listen to this are definitely going to resonate with a lot of what you had to say.
And thank you. This has been really fun. Really lovely to meet you, chat with you, and to share our wisdoms. Thank you so much.
Mm, absolutely. Well, thank you all for listening to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. I greatly appreciate all of your listens. If you resonated with what Helen and I had to discuss today and you feel like it would be beneficial to any of your friends or family, please share it on your platforms, share it with whoever it could bring value so that we can continue to expand the consciousness of the collective. So thanks again for being here, and I'll catch you on the next one.